This video is supported by Galder's Gazetteer, a 5e expansion for advanced players. Contrary to popular belief, Exploration is the pillar of play with the most official support. The real problem is DMs are not used to framing exploration opportunities in a way that the players recognize. And that's because, collectively, we as a community have too narrow a view of what exploration actually is. This video is going to be in two parts. One bit the theoretical, sort of heady way of looking at the exploration pillar. I'm going to talk about some misconceptions it's placed in the game, and then argue that to really appreciate exploration, you have to take a wider view. Then I'm going to use that theory to diagram out the archetypical exploration encounter, delving a dungeon. Then we're going to apply that framework to other areas of the game that DMs don't typically think of as exploration, but actually are. First off, we need to clear something up about this whole 3 pillars framework. There is no cosmic law that says D&D has to be exactly 3 pillars. It's just something that the designers arbitrarily decided. They could have just as easily said there are 2 pillars, dungeons, which is locations and navigating the world, and dragons, which would be fighting monsters and talking to creatures. Or they could have done 6, 1 for each stat, right? Like strength would be fighting, dexterity would be stealthing, charisma would be talking. You get the idea. The point being, there's nothing magical about saying there are exactly 3 parts to the game. But if we are going to divide everything up into 3 neat categories, I think we need to expand our idea of what exploration is. That is, exploration is now everything that isn't fighting or talking. When people think of exploration, they typically only think of 2 things, delving the dungeon and overland travel. But exploration has to be more than that. If it couldn't be done as a play on a stage or as a tactical minis game, it's exploration. It's how the players connect with all the non-living parts of the world. Yes, it's deciding which doors to open and surviving a trek through the mountains, but it's also which city districts to visit and whether or not to poke the goo. Things that aren't necessarily rules bound, but still essential player driven activities. And this is the important part, players are also exploring the narrative world, what setting details to uncover, and what story threads to follow. Exploration is not just the fantastic locations visited, it's the adventure itself. Aside from a few lines of text that support an NPC's personality, or the occasional monster stat block, all of what is covered in these books is content for the players to explore. It's the biggest part of the game, and it has the most official content to help you out. All the maps, all the fantastic locations detailed, all the rich world building and plot hooks to follow. All of that is things the players explore when playing the game. It's all there for them to discover. And that is the real driver of exploration, discovery, introducing a new element for the players to react to. The endless promise of uncovering new secrets or finding new wonders is one of the core appeals of tabletop RPGs that no other type of game can offer. And that should be your goal when running exploration scenes, to keep up the sense that there's always something more to discover in the world. When folks talk about the oft-maligned no support for exploration, what I think they're getting at is there isn't a step-by-step guide for how to do it. But at the same time, there is no support for the social pillar of play. From the game's point of view, roleplay is just something that you do, with dice rolls thrown in at the DM's discretion. In a lot of ways, there's no real support for combat either. The monster manual doesn't really give you tips and tactics for how to use these baddies. It's just a collection of stat blocks, bits of individual pieces that the DM is expected to put together on their own. Likewise, for the exploration pillar, there is tons of content. It's just the DM is expected to figure out how to weave it together on their own. Part of the problem is there's not a strong framework in the collective conscious for thinking about exploration. Combat, with all its math, is down to a science in the online RPG brain trust. And generally, everyone accepts that social interaction falls on a spectrum from roleplay to roleplay. But there isn't a widely used method or process when talking about exploration. And generally, my point of view is, if something has a process instead of just figuring it out ad hoc, then you can build upon it and improve it. So where can we find this structure for exploration? Well, it's right there in the player's handbook, where they define what the exploration pillar is. They give you the core of it, but I think it's something DMs tend to overlook. It's the give and take between the players narrating their actions and the DM determining the results. In other words, the exploration pillar is really the quintessential DM question. What do you do? In this framework, exploration is the part we typically think of as just playing the game. It's that cycle we all know and love, and it goes something like this. Setup, react, resolution, back to setup. In a published module in a dungeon, the setup is actually pretty clear. Read the box text. It sets the scene. It creates atmosphere by using flowery prose and appealing to the senses. It points out key features worthy of attention. A good setup invites the players to respond to what was just presented, even without the ubiquitous, what do you do? Step 2 is the players respond by declaring their intention. I kick down the door. I examine the strange tome. I continue down the hall prodding with my 10-foot pole. And step 3 is the DM resolves the intent of their actions. Now, sometimes there's a mechanical barrier, make a check to foil the trap or push the boulder, and sometimes not. Sometimes the door just opens. Now, with or without a mechanical barrier, the resolution always takes one of two forms. Either the current fiction is being affected, the statue is knocked over, you swing over the pit, you close the gate, or it's resolved by introducing something new into the fiction, a discovery being made. And keep in mind that discovery is what we're after, because each and every time the players discover something new, it's an opportunity to repeat this cycle. It keeps the game moving forward. The benefit of realizing that exploration is that cycle of player DM, action, reaction, is that you can apply that familiar structure to other areas of gameplay that need to be explored. And you can already imagine how this would play out in another area of gameplay, like a city. You do this setup when they enter a new district or exit a building, by describing the chatter of a nearby market, the distant ringing of church bells, the stench of a tanner. The players react, they go looking for weapons or go find a tavern, and then you resolve. Maybe they make a charisma check to barter, or maybe their background lets them get into the temple without fuss. But you either change what's happening as a result of their actions, knowing players something probably caught fire, or the heroes discovered something new. Maybe it's a sewer system, maybe it's a rare book in a library, maybe it's a thieves guild, or a rumor. And that's the point. You can apply this idea not just to locations like cities or planescapes, but to politics, lore, story threads, and other narrative features. When players are exploring the story, they are choosing what parts of the world they want to develop and discover. I tend to run a pretty sandbox style game. My players are free to choose which threads they pull on to unveil the breadth and depth of the setting. This is one of the reasons I don't necessarily like lore dumps. I typically only reveal lore my players poke and prod. Like in Dark Souls or Morrowind, understanding the world only comes from a deliberate attempt by the players. This not only creates the feeling that the knowledge is really earned and hence valuable, but it also fulfills our purpose of exploration. The players are discovering the world. You already know how to do exploration scenes. The issue is, this is typically only done with any sort of forethought or structure to a very narrow slice of what exploration is. I think a lot of DMs will just artlessly hand their players a list of quests and say adventure. But this is really unsatisfying because there's no setup. There's no tension in that presentation. There's no sense of discovery lying in wait. And the same thing happens when DMs are trying to present their political world. They'll just hand the players a list of factions with names and descriptions, as though that's somehow gonna get the players to care about the intricate and complex relationships. And I was guilty of that too, until I found a better way. How exactly to give your players a plot hook is probably a topic worthy of its own video. But if we look at that exploration cycle, there are definitely things we can do to improve the play experience and letting our players discover the story and world. Step 1 is the setup. What should we do when we start a new scene or uncover a new bit of the story? Our lessons from the box text tell us that we should establish atmosphere by appealing to the senses. The purpose being we want to point out areas that are worthy of the player's attention. But what if we want to go beyond a location? How do we incorporate that into a sense of global exploration? Well, we can't appeal to physical senses, but we can still do a sense of mystery, a sense of dread, a sense of intrigue or terror. The prose you use to dress up a plot hook can create the atmosphere for that part of the story that's intriguing enough for your players to want to explore it. And more than just your fancy words, what you should really be focusing on is giving the players something clear to act on, because that's our second step. The player's action is obviously mostly on the players, but there are still things you as a DM can do to sort of coach your players along. When your players are describing their reaction to what they have just uncovered, after you get their initial response, try to get them to elaborate on their intent. How are they approaching the sewer district? What exact info are they looking for in the secret history of the Black Dawn? The intent is important because it really guides our next step, the resolution. Now, obviously you can just drop a hook in front of the players, but if you want to add a mechanical gate, there are a few things you can do. You can use the knowledge skills like history, arcana, or religion. Or you can tie the ability to unlock a certain area of the story to a character's background, or maybe it's only accessible after they've finished another quest. Whether or not you decide to gate it, the resolution of discovering a new bit of the story is either your players are going to affect the current narrative, or they've introduced a new bit of the story for them to discover. The first one, you get to help tell a cool story, but you can tell a story with your friends without the help of a DM. It's that second form of resolution, the continually revealing of new plots, setting details, secret lore, the fact that there is always something more to discover than what's being shown just at the table. That's what makes RPGs so captivating. The benefit of this more structural approach is that it allows you really to take advantage of one of the unique aspects of the exploration pillar. Unlike other pillars of play, exploration has scale. Unless you're using a homebrew system for mass combat, fight scenes are always at the individual level. Likewise, social interaction is a tete-a-tete between players and individual PCs. Players don't normally take on the role of an entire guild or a royal family. Their character might be the head of a faction, but players aren't expected to take on playing a multitude. But exploration, it goes from the split-second decision of a single character, what they do when they hear a trap go click, all the way to the cosmos spanning an epic, a great odyssey across 10 years over many planes. Even though exploration is both the micro decisions of whether or not to pull a lever or which hall to go down, and the macro level of the days crossing the wilds or embarking on a new adventure, exploration follows the same structure. The point being, anytime the DM sets a new scene, they should take the opportunity to remind players what new things there are to discover. Yeah, that's it. That's the video, folks. Stay tuned real fast. I want to tell you about the new playtest packet for Galder's Gazetteer. If you're a big fan of Homebrew, you'll love the new class by Kibbles Tasty in there, the Rune Wielder. It also has a variant Barbarian, Monk, and Sorcerer. Not just variant class features, but a whole new skeleton in which you can build these classes on. Pretty cool stuff. If you're interested in that design process or curious about my home game, I have a $1 Patreon where I put all of my RPG stuff, so make sure to check that out. The other way to support the channel is, of course, to like and subscribe. And if you have some thoughts on exploration, I respond to nearly every comment, so be sure to let me know in the comments below.